Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for watching Africa on the Move. Thank you for your commitment. Thank you for your support. Thanks to you, we're growing up bigger and bigger. I have today a friend, a colleague, Madina Toure. Thank you for coming.
Thank you for having me, Tosh.
Oh, my pleasure. You know, I want to start this show with an anecdote. In any community, whenever you are having a party, you are organizing a fundraiser, an event, a TV show, there are some people that have to get involved. You are one of those people in this community. Can you tell us what is your job about? But first, can you introduce yourself to our viewers?
Yeah. Well, again, thank you so much for having me, Tosh. I've always been a fan of you. I've known each other for years.
Oh, wow, really?
I've been a fan of your show. I've seen Africa TV USA. You're always at different community events covering whatever is happening in the community. So the community is very lucky to have you. I think you and I are among a relatively small number of African journalists. I think more and more I'm starting to discover more African journalists.
Yeah, actually I was going to ask you this question.
I think there are somewhat more African journalists now, but it's always great to connect with a fellow African journalist. But of course, to answer your question, I am an education reporter at Politico, New York. I started working there in June. So my beat is citywide education policy and politics. So I'm covering the city's public school system and higher education. So anything that relates to policy and politics as it pertains to education is a part of my beat. So, I'm covering the chancellor. I think there are big issues right now like segregation in the city's public school system, the mayor's plan to eliminate the single admission test at the city's specialized high schools, and then other specific issues like at CUNY, for example, you have food insecure students who are going hungry. You also have issues pertaining to students with disabilities, English language learners. So it's a pretty broad beat, but it's a very important issue. But to kind of give you a brief summary of who I am and what I do. Before that, I was at The Observer covering New York City politics, City Hall, and I was covering the mayor and kind of the governor and national news as it pertained to the city and sort of niche topics like NYCHA and MTA. But I also covered, I did cover immigration and African immigrants. And before that, I also covered the city's minority and woman-owned business enterprise program, police reform, a lot of police reform activists. I was at the time.
So you are a true journalist people are looking for in this community. Can you tell us a few of your coverage of African people?
To talk a little bit about my involvement in the community, it actually started around 2014. A friend who, at this point is a sister, Fatima Diallo, who runs the Miskini USA organization. I started working with the Miskini USA pageant after my cousin connected me to her, and I was helping out with media and like writing press releases and getting people to cover it. I hosted the pageant twice, and I think because of her, she introduced me to all of these young Africans in the community that we all hear about all the time, like Charles Cooper and Famoud Kone, and then eventually in covering politics, I met people like Fatou Wage and Mohamed Kaba and Abdurrahman Diallo and Asma Jallo and Mariam Mohammed and all Wahira Marda. I could go on about all the rising young African stars in our community. And then, not to mention Charles Falls, who's in the State Assembly. I met all of these people through my work in the community and meeting Fatima and also in my job. So that's a little bit about my involvement in the community. In terms of my coverage, when I was at The Observer, I do some coverage of African immigrants as part of my overall coverage of immigration. So for example, I would say about 2 years ago, there was a big march in the Bronx. I think it was the Coalition for Muslim and Immigration Justice. I hope I'm getting the title right. They had a big march where they were marching against President Trump's executive orders barring entry to people from Muslim-majority countries. There was also like a Muslim Women's March where they were trying to tell the real stories of Muslim women. And even just as part of my stories, I would talk to Africans. So that's and I did some reporting on the Black Alliance for Just Immigration and things like that.
Okay, so can you tell me a little bit what is the main issue of African people? I know you cover a lot of events, but what do you think African people are more concerned about?
Right. I think that's a great question. As you know, there are you know, a lot of challenges that all immigrant communities face that are similar, but there are some issues that are specific to African immigrants. I think I would start, like, you know, since I cover education, like within the context of education, you can talk about culture shock, you know, kind of dealing with, you know, kind of the African culture at home and how that kind of clashes with school, language barrier. You know, sometimes there may be situations where the parents may not speak English, or maybe the students may be English language learners, or the chancellor is calling it multilingual learners now. So kind of the specific issues pertaining to that.
We're going to come back on this. I want to come back on the journalism, the passion you have for this job. How did you get it?
Yeah, well, I think writing is something that has always been a passion of mine. And I think because of my parents' background, you know, my father is from Guinea, was raised in Guinea. My mom is from the Comoros Islands. She grew up in France. I've always had an interest in, like, kind of different diverse communities. I'm also Muslim. You know, they're both obviously French-speaking, so I speak French. And I think I've always kind of had sort of a global mindset, but have always been really interested in, like, the locally minded things too. You know, I think just in terms of journalism, like, I think writing is something that's always been a passion of mine. And, you know, I've always been really kind of locally oriented, and I have worked for, like, ethnic and community media, and my first full-time job in journalism was at the Times-Ledger newspapers in Queens. So I think that's really a lot of what...
You work for different news media, and now you work at Politico. What do you like working with Politico?
Oh, well, yeah, I think I've been having a very good experience at Politico, and I like being able to kind of delve into sort of the policy aspects of some of these issues. I think, you know, especially since I'm covering education, really understanding the policy and the history of the policy of these different educational issues has been really interesting. Because the focus is very much on policy and on politics, it really kind of forces you to understand the issues in a more comprehensive way. But I think all of the publications that I've worked at had a positive impact on me. I think at Times-Ledger newspapers, you know, just working for a local paper, learning the ins and outs of reporting, going out to community board meetings, civic association meetings, really building relationships with sources, like, you know, and even before that, when I was working like community and ethnic news, like Sahara Reporters and, you know, Africa Business Insider and Africa.com and publications like that, you know, even to this day, like, I bring this locally minded perspective to all of my reporting. I'm always thinking about, okay, I feel like I like, I like being on the scene. That was something that I learned in working for community and ethnic media, being on the scene, going to areas, speaking with people directly. And then, of course, like, diversity, the importance of diversity in media.
That's a good part of the job, right? Journalism. You cover political stories before, and now you cover education stories now. What do you like most between politics and education?
Well, I should say with the education beat, it is a mixture of policy and politics, but perhaps a little bit different from the City Hall beat. I think, you know, with this beat, I'm focusing on one particular topic. So I'm focusing on education, public schools and higher education.
Why? Because you don't want to deal with politics, building the wall, stuff like that?
No, actually, but the thing is, I think that, you know, the good thing I would say, and maybe something that might make me stand out, is that, you know, because you know, in previous positions, I had broader beats where I was covering different issues like immigration and NYCHA and MTA and police reform and this,
and
that.
Now you have to change.
I feel like coming into the education beat, I have kind of an awareness and understanding of so many different issues that, you know, in addition to covering the usual topics of education, I can kind of insert a different perspective.
Tell me about a challenge, a problem you encounter. How do you deal with it?
I mean, I think my experience at Politico has been very good, and I think, you know, my editor and I have a very good communication, and you know, I think in general with reporting, there's always going to be, like, and not even specific to the job, but even when you're dealing with sources, sometimes, you know, you're going to get story ideas that are going to be a little bit tough, and you have to kind of like figure out and navigate a way to how to report. Like, I can just give an example. Like, I remember recently I had a story that was a little bit like of a challenging piece, and so, my editor and I kind of like worked together to figure out a way to make sure the story was balanced and that there was the right nuance. So it was just a story that was like kind of a topic that's, gets people riled up a little bit. So, we made sure to like take the time to really vet the pitch and make sure that, things were solid, and we had like constant communication about that.
Did you ever cover a story you don't like, but you have to because your job sent you to do it?
I think that's the thing that's really interesting with journalism. We have conversations about objectivity and bias, and there's a lot of that. But I think, fundamentally, our job, at least, my job is kind of to cover straight news. And so it's really just kind of covering whatever news comes up on my beat. And so I think, oftentimes you're going to have to be covering something that expresses one point of view, and you're going to have to cover something that expresses another point of view. And so I think, in every instance, I always try to make sure that, I'm giving everyone a fair shake. If someone launches an attack on someone, you got to talk to the other side. You got to make sure that everyone has an opportunity to say their piece. And some issues are very divisive. I mean, we're talking about education, the mayor's specialized high school plan. There's so many different...
Yeah, we're going to talk about that later.
There's so many different... That's an example. There's so many different opinions about that.
That will be the part 2 of the show, yes. Okay, so where do you see yourself in 10 years? I mean, 5 years maybe, because you are very smart, So maybe in 5 years, something going to change in your life. So where do you see yourself in 5 years?
I would say that I definitely see myself remaining and staying in the local media space. I really like covering New York City. My brothers and I were all born and raised here, and I think local reporting is so important. And I like covering politics, but I also am very community oriented. I like covering different communities, so I see myself really continuing along that vein, trying to continue to cover African immigrants, other immigrants, covering minority and marginalized communities. And I think education is certainly among the issues that I want to be covering.
Do you want to create your own media online?
I haven't thought that far ahead yet.
Really?
Listen, I think you never know what your future is going to bring, but so who knows? Who knows? Maybe that's in my cards. Maybe that's in my direction. You never say never to anything. The sky's the limit. I never imagined that I'd make it this far to be working at a publication like Politico, and I've worked in so many great places. So the fact that I worked at Times Ledger, at the Observer, at Politico, I feel very grateful for where I've gotten in my career. I think I definitely see myself remaining a journalist and writing and doing local media. But
do you want to do broadcasting too? Because you can do it.
I don't know. Yeah, I think the broadcast is an interesting medium. So who knows where my life takes me.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for watching Africa on the Move. I'm going to show you part 2 of this show, and we come back here with Madina for the part 3 of this show. Thank you.
Do we have women here? Wonderful. The month of March is our month. This is the month when we have to make our voice heard, right? Thank you very much for being here. Again, this event has been organized with the U.S. Mali Charitable Association of New York in collaboration with H.M. Dagupa Foundation. Again, with all our sponsors, I will have the chance to welcome them tonight, and again, thanks them for being able to sponsor that event. My name is Estelle Yeso, and I will be your MC tonight. We are going to start with our group of young children that are here and are going to perform for us tonight. So I will ask you, with a round of applause, to encourage those young children that will be coming here up front with Dr. Jenkins. Please give your hands, put your hands together for our children. Fulani Sethi, Director of Policy, New York Mayor Office to End Domestic and Gender-Based Violence.
Our office is really a recognition of what Councilmember Ampry Samuels said, that we haven't really gotten to a point where we've eliminated violence against women or eliminated gender-based violence anywhere in the world, including right here in New York City, right? And I think the creation of our office is really, you know, it's important because it sort of shows us that New York City wants to be a leader in this work. We really want to think about how we do this, and we know the name is aspirational, right? We're trying to end something that's been going on for a very long time, but we think that we can do it here. You know, and I think one of the things that I'll say is when we think about how to do this work, we focus on sort of, you know, 4 key categories, right? One of the things that our office provides is intervention or services. We operate 5 family justice centers, 1 in each borough throughout New York City, that provide free walk-in services to any survivors of gender-based violence, regardless of immigration status, regardless of language spoken, regardless of your ability to pay. We also do a lot of prevention work and education work, because obviously I think, as some folks have mentioned, we can't do this, we can't end gender-based violence, including reproductive violence, including FGM, including other forms of violence. We can't do that, you know, end it without doing preventative work and educating our communities. And then finally, you know, the other thing our office does is really tries to coordinate and collaborate throughout the city with various elected officials, with other city agencies, and with our community-based organization, our CBO partners.
Would like our honorable guests, they will just say a little word just to greet you. I will start with Congresswoman of New York, Mrs. Yvette Clarke. You can speak from your mind.
That we as women need to share about women's reproductive rights and health. Being in the United States Congress, where for the first time in the history of the United States Congress, we have over 100 women serving in the United States House of Representatives. I am proud to stand shoulder to shoulder with the global community in raising up the voices of girls and women to talk about equal rights, to talk about equity in our societies, to talk about the governance of our own bodies and using our own voices and our own power to make sure that the next generation of girls coming up will not be fighting the same battles that we have fought for generations. Let me thank Mrs. C for her unwavering commitment to the liberation of women and girls. Let me thank Lily DeGupta for her vision of what empowering women can be across the globe and in India in particular. And let me thank all who have come out this evening to again share best practices, to coalesce and to build together a breakthrough moment in the 21st century, when all women, irregardless of their economic status, where they find themselves in the world, can stand up shoulder to shoulder in their communities with their male counterparts and be respected, be protected, and know that they are the governors ultimately of their own growth and development, their own reproductive health, and can do that without any fear of reprisal or repercussion. So thank you so much for having me here today, to everyone who has come out.
Since he's sitting side by side with Congresswoman Yvette Clarke, I will actually give the mic to Councilmember Levine.
Merci beaucoup. Merci beaucoup. I do want you to know that, at least here in New York, the leadership of the city truly cherishes our immigrant communities, our African immigrant communities, our Malian immigrant communities, our Muslim sisters and brothers, and we stand with you and we support you. And I want you to know how much I have been truly inspired by the contributions of Malian African communities in my district in northern Manhattan. You have truly enriched this city culturally, economically. You are leading at the heights of every sector of society here, from academia to business to government to science and beyond. And as chair of the health committee, really the concerns of women's health, of immigrant health, are paramount for us, where we still face very, very profound disparities. And so I stand with you in confronting those inequalities, and I salute the leadership of this gathering today for focusing us on this wonderful, wonderful, important issue. Merci beaucoup. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for watching Africa on the Move, part 2 of this show. Madina Toure, she's an education reporter at Politico. Thank you again for coming, Madina.
Thank you for having me.
Part 2 of this show, let's talk about education, right? So, specialized high school test is October or September. So tell me a little bit about what's going to happen.
All right, well, I think it's great that you brought that up because right now there's a bit of a debate going on about the city's specialized high schools. There are currently 8. They're the big 3, Bronx Science, Brooklyn Tech, and Stuyvesant. Those were created under a 1971 state law. And, you know, you have to take a test in order to get into those schools. And then there were 5, and that's required by that 1971 state law. Then you have 5 additional schools that were created after that law where the city could change the admissions process, but they say they would rather not because they think it's a legally murky thing. And so what the mayor has done, Mayor Bill de Blasio, he has introduced this plan that he introduced last summer, which would get rid of this test. So it would happen in several phases. So in the first phase, what would happen is that he would expand the Discovery Program. The Discovery Program is a program that you know, is for students who just missed the cutoff score to get into the schools. So he would expand that further. And then the second part would scrap out the test over 3 years. And then by the third phase, what would happen is that 7% of students at each middle school would be admitted to these schools and instead of using the test. So there's a big debate going on about that right now. It doesn't seem like there's a lot of appetite for it in Albany. There's kind of a mixed, I think pro-integration advocates are saying that they appreciate the plan and even want to go farther. I think there's some Asian American families and advocates who are like, well, we think this is going to discriminate against Asian students. So,
how do you see the performance of African children at school compared to other students?
Well, I mean, I can certainly speak to some of the specific challenges that I think African children are dealing with. I think, you know, something that, you know, stands out to me is kind of language barrier. I mean, I think one major thing is just like, let's say you have parents who, you know, are African, they're immigrants, they come here, maybe they don't know the system. You know, maybe they're not, because we all know that different countries in different parts of the world have different educational systems. And so I know that, you know, the system here might be different from the system back home. And so maybe it's like the parents don't exactly know how things work. And so, you know, they can't necessarily.
And sometimes we don't have time for our children too.
Right.
We're too busy, right?
That's true. And this is an important point.
Yeah.
You know, like let's say now you have multiple jobs to support your kids to survive. It's a little bit challenging to go to parent-teacher conferences, or it's a little bit challenging to keep up on everything that's happening, you know, I think that's certainly a challenge as well. And, you know, how do you address, I think that's a big question that a lot of people in the community are asking, how do we address these issues? Like, you know, let's say, what if a child isn't doing well in school, but maybe, you know, the parent is too busy, can't go to a parent-teacher conference, or maybe even there's a language barrier, you know? Maybe the parents, because they don't speak English, or maybe the English isn't perfect or whatever, and I'm not saying that this is the case for all African parents, but in some instances that's the case. That can be a challenge too, like who is going to communicate to the parents? And I think this is why, you know, there are a lot of like different groups in the community that try to support, you know, Africans with education and other related issues.
Okay, I think we don't have enough time. I'm going to ask you a few questions about politics now. How do you see the involvement of African people? Do you think they are getting really involved in politics here?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's sort of a mixed bag. I think on the one hand, yes, I think, you know, civic engagement in the African community, you know, there continues to be a challenge, you know, trying to get more people to come out and vote and be involved locally, you know, being on community boards, being in civic groups, being in political clubs, whatever it is, or, you know, even community organizing, things like that. But on the other hand, what's been interesting to watch, you know, and maybe, you know, offering a perspective as a young African who's like 28, turning 29 in August, is that there are a lot of people in my generation, like you know, people like first-generation Africans, you know, Africans who, you know, whose parents came here and, you know, they were born here and they were raised here, and they are getting engaged in politics. I mentioned a number of names.
Example.
I think Charles Fall, you know, being elected to the State Assembly, the first African to be elected in New York City. He was born and raised here, just like me. He's a son of Guinean immigrants. He's also, like, you know, the first Muslim and the first black man elected on Staten Island, etc. But in addition to him, I mentioned a number of names. Like, look at people like Fatou Wage. You know, she worked with African communities together. Mohamed Kaba, who was at the mayor's office.
But
of
we still don't have a lot of African immigrants, you know, who are running for office.
But, you know,
this is the problem.
Right, exactly. And just, yeah, and I agree with you. And I think to continue also, like, you know, you have Wahira Marda, you have Mariam Mohammed. There are a lot of Mamadou Siriba. There are a lot of young Amadou Rahman Diallo, Asma Diallo, all these people who are very engaged in their community, political or otherwise. Now, to your point, yes, you know, that is, and I should say Abdurrahman is not someone who was born here, but he came here from Guinea. But I think, to your point, yes, you're seeing African-born immigrants running for office. We have seen that in the past, but they haven't been able to succeed yet, right? I think, you know, that speaks to some of the factors, the challenges that prevent people, like, one, strategy, you know, picking the right seat at the right time, you know, making sure that you have a plan. Do you understand the needs of all of the constituents in your district? You know, and then sometimes we have cases like in 2013, the seat currently held by Councilmember Vanessa Gibson, where you have like there were at least 4 or 5 different Africans running. You split up the vote. So there are some lessons and things that need to be learned.
Okay. Okay, Madina. I mean, we're running out of time, so I'm going to ask you the last question. Sure. Is, you know, still coming back to your passion, the journalism. What advice do you want to give to your brothers and sisters who want to do journalism? Okay, well, I would say one thing is just like definitely reading the news and always paying attention to everything that's going on around you, whether it's locally, nationally, or internationally. I think networking is very important. Always, you know, going to different events, interacting with different journalists. You know, I'm a journalist. You're a journalist. There are other journalists in this community like Isu Diouf and Ese Olumhense and Mazen Sid Ahmed. There are other African journalists that people in the community could be turning to for advice. And yeah. Thank you, Madina, for coming. Thank you. I hope you come back here again in this show. Yeah, definitely. Right. Thank you so much. No problem. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you, Madina Toure, education reporter at Politico. Thank you.